Nuput Away Dharma Talks.
I thought what we talk about today is this concept of Buddhism. You may have read about Buddhism, and there are lots of books about Buddhism. Some of them seem to contradict each other, and they say all sorts of things from all parts of the world, and different languages get mixed up. You know, they've got bits of Sanskrit, bits of Pali, bits of Tibetan, bits of Japanese or Thai, and the whole thing seems to get very jumbled and very complicated. And it could be quite off-putting, really, thinking, what am I getting into here? I came along because I thought life was stressful. I came along because I needed some space. I needed to find some peace. I came along because I wanted to make better sense of my life, maybe develop some courage in the face of grief, death, sickness, get along better with people, develop some wisdom, and now I seem to be getting immersed in all these complications coming from Japan and Tibet and Thailand and people arguing. And the last thing I wanted was to argue, because there's certainly no peace in arguing about the meaning of karma or anything else that comes up in Buddhism. And there's some pretty abstruse things with strange names like dependent origination. What on earth could that mean? Is that going to help me find any peace? Is that going to help me with any wisdom? So I just want to sort of give a potted history of how this thing called Buddhism seems to have developed and strayed away from the fundamental question of human anxiety and deep puzzlement about being here and why things never ever seem to work out as we expect them. How could it all have become so complicated? I don't think it was particularly complicated for the Buddha. It was difficult, it was hard, but it wasn't complicated. He left his home, and we are told that when he did this, he encountered old age, sickness and death around him, and that is what set him on the path. Well, that doesn't seem to make sense to start with, because why did he leave his home? If he hadn't left his home and his family, he wouldn't have encountered those things. So there must have been some motive for leaving in the first place. So that doesn't quite add up. And one has to think through oneself with the whole of this thing called Buddhism and not deviate too far from, if you like, the personal nature of it. That it is about you and me. It is about finding peace. It is about finding wisdom. It's about compassion for each other and for ourselves. So if you like, it's simple. It has some forward movement. We know already what it's about or what it ought to be about, but a lot of myths have developed around it, a lot of scriptures have developed around it, a lot of institutions have developed around it. It's got embedded in different cultures. And then when we bring it to where we are here, because we are stressed here, as they were in Tibet or Japan, we then find that we have to bring, somehow we think we have to bring the culture with it. So let's try to be Thai, or let's try to be Tibetan, or let's try to be Japanese. What on earth are we doing? The problem is simple. We are all human beings, and we are stressed, and we are puzzled, bewildered, and we're in conflict with each other. And we don't seem to be able to escape this condition. So this is very simple. It's a simple matter of the human condition. So we ought to be able to cut through all the complications and stick with what is real about it, what we respond to with our hearts and minds. When the Buddha left, he must have left because he was, as a young person, someone that was already puzzled by these things. And it appears that he, as a fairly privileged person, he would have had some teachers who were wise men or wise women who were coming to teach him about the ancient teachings, the Vedic teachings of the time that the Brahmins were the custodians of. And all of this must have puzzled him, and he thought, well, in our society, people go out. They go out and become homeless. They give up everything, and it was a tradition to do that. So he joined what must have been thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of people, who were wandering about looking for an answer to the mystery of being here at all, and why it seems to be so scary being here. And there were various sects and traditions that were already in existence. There were the Brahmins, who were priests who became the upper echelons of that society, and they had some secret formula called the Vedas, and they used to sacrifice animals and so on. And of course the Buddha knew about this, but he wasn't a Brahmin, and he seems to have been rather suspicious about that. He didn't seem to really respond to that very well. So he thought, well, let's go and ask these other wise people that are wandering about. Another group were the Jains. These were very simple people. Some of them were running around naked, actually, trying to give up everything, even their clothes, to try to get to the bottom of the mystery of life. And they took on the idea that if one is serious about letting go of conflict and living in peace, that one shouldn't harm anything at all. So they didn't want to harm even insects. They took it to an absolute extreme. And it does appear there's evidence that the Buddha came into contact with them and learned a lot from them, but decided that that wasn't quite the way he wanted to go either. Then he came into contact with other extreme ascetics who thought the problem is actually the body. The body is greedy, the body wants sex, the body wants food, the body is the body. So let us punish the body, let's reduce the body down to absolute minimum. Let's try and almost get rid of this thing called the body and live just in the mind or in the heart or wherever. So he joined these extreme ascetics and then almost starved himself, very close to death, according to the story. And it has the ring of truth about it because he wasn't the only one following that path. And it would have been natural for anyone that was serious about spiritual issues to have tried that. It was when he came close to the point of death, he thought, well, now I'm going to die and I still don't know the answer. So this can't be it. Then he went off and met two very well-known teachers of concentration meditation. One was called Alara Kadama. These were the greatest around that he could find. And he thought, well, these are good teachers. These are going to tell me how to go about it. So he learned concentration, meditation from these two characters. And to their great surprise, he mastered it in no time at all. But he still wasn't quite satisfied. He did say to himself, I've learned a lot here. We're onto something now. At last I'm on the right road. But there's still something that seems to be missing. So he decided, okay, I've tried everything. I've been everywhere. I found the best teachers. I've adopted every approach imaginable. I know what the Brahmins are teaching, and I don't like that. It's too secretive, and it involves, for example, excluding women. It involves sacrificing animals, and I don't want any truck with that. So I'll do it myself. So then, on the basis of what he'd already learned, he sat under a tree and spent a very long time trying to get to the bottom of what it was that he could find in himself that would somehow put him in contact with the whole of reality. And what he encountered, of course, was his ego. Me. I want this, I want that, I don't want this, I don't want that. Who am I? What am I? Am I not Shakyamuni Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama, that came from this well-known family in amongst the Shakya clan? Is that not me? No, that's not me. What if I'd been born somewhere else? Wouldn't I be a different person? He couldn't seem to get rid of the self, and he realized it was the self that kept grasping after things. So he thought, well, okay, need to work on that, need to subdue the self, need to let go of this wanting, this craving, this greed, this strong sense that I have that somehow I'm separate from everything. How do I erode that such that I can become at one with everything? And he worked so hard on that one day it happened. It was as though his self disappeared and he became united with everything. And it happened when apparently he saw a star coming up, and suddenly it was as though he was the star and the star was himself, and suddenly all problems dropped away. He felt blissful, peaceful, and what he saw was the tragedy of human life. The appalling tragedy of human life, of the pain we cause ourselves and cause each other. And he thought, it's all unnecessary. Now I've seen what I can see that it's all one huge farcical tragedy. But can I tell anybody about this? Can I tell anybody about this? Will they believe me? Will they understand? Look what I've had to go through to get to this point. Is anybody going to understand? Apparently he had some inspiration that even if a few people understand, it's worth it. Even if few people understand some of it, it's worth it. But he had no expectation that everyone would understand it. But it was worthwhile if some could understand it. So he ran off to find the people that he'd been learning from earlier on. And finally some people started listening to him, and when he explained it all, because they'd already been practicing pretty severely, it clicked. And they thought, yeah, you've got it. So then they started following him and said, well, let's make an effort to teach this, make it known to others. Now what happens after that is all history. Do we need it? Do we need to know how it spread? Well, it did spread, of course, but I don't know whether we need to know how it spread, because we've already got the story, we've already got the gist of it. It has direct appeal to each one of us. Do we need all the complications? Of course, he had more and more followers. They wandered about, teaching others. When the Buddha finally died at the age of 80 years, he'd been teaching for 45 years. And to live to 80 in that society was quite an achievement, with all the disease, the lack of medicine and technology that we have now. He lived to 80, he died. Now what was going to happen next? Was the teaching going to be lost? Well, not really, because the problem is still with us. Human beings are still here. Our ignorance is still here. Our propensity to greed, hatred, etc. is still here. And the way out is still here. We just have to re-find it. So, in a way, it can't be lost. It'll pop up somewhere, somehow, all the time. It can't be stopped, in a sense, because we have the human condition. If there were no humans, well, I suppose that would stop it, except that other sentient beings might arise in the future. Who knows what it'll look like in 10,000 or 100,000 years' time or 1 million years' time? We have no clue at all. Maybe beings far superior to ourselves will have a better understanding of things. And we might have to do a lot of suffering on the way to get there. But anyway, once he had gone, his followers got together. They said, we're going to forget what he taught us. Let's meet, recite everything that we can remember that he taught us. And one or two of them are particularly good at doing this. They had sort of photographic memories. So since they didn't write things down at that time, the only way they could remember it was by putting it into formulae and reciting it. And then another group of people would remember it, and then they would pass it down through generations. Now, in the modern day of smartphones and computers, we think, that's not going to work. Well, believe me, this so-called oral tradition does work, and it can work for centuries. But you can imagine what happens with sort of Chinese whispers effect, is that it starts getting corroded, changed, added to, and so on. What made the Buddha's teaching a world religion or world spirituality, or let's call it a universal insight for all human beings that could be transmitted all over the planet, was the fact that a very powerful king called Ashoka took it up. He had conquered huge areas of what is now called India. And he came across the Buddha's teachings and said, that's right. I'm now going to push that. And push it he did. He put up stelas or steels, whatever you call them, sort of stone implements with engravings of the Buddha's teaching on them, as far as what is now Afghanistan. And went as far as Sri Lanka, what is now Sri Lanka, taking this teaching with him. Just as when a Roman emperor took up Christ's teachings and then it became a world religion, so it was Ashoka, about 200 years before Christ, who was the emperor at that time, for a large section of what is now India, took up the Buddhist teaching that made it possible for this suddenly to explode in all directions. It ended up in Sri Lanka. Someone called Buddhaghosa, who was a great scholar, he thought, well, this teaching needs a little bit of systematizing, need to organize this. Let's put it into a big encyclopedia. Sounds like a good idea, but the trouble was, this was the encyclopedia according to his interpretation. Just as St. Paul came along after Jesus and said, need to make this a bit more systematic. Let's write it all down and get it right here. Paul, who had persecuted Christians, who never met Jesus. The same thing was happening. Buddhaghosa, in the 5th century, nearly 1,000 years after the Buddha, said, let's put it all together in one big place, make it easy for all the monks. So now the monks started focusing on what Buddhaghosa had to say and all what the Buddha had to say, not looking into themselves so much as following the teachings as put down by Buddhaghosa. That's what happened in creating the Theravada and related traditions in southern India that spread to Myanmar and Thailand and other parts of Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, it was also spreading north, but in a different way. Because they didn't take any notice of Buddhaghosa, they didn't know who Buddhaghosa was. They developed something which is now known as Mahayana Buddhism. The idea there basically was, let's take this teaching out of the monasteries. Let's give it to the people. Instead of the monk who is especially gifted developing enlightenment and being called an arahant, we need a different idea. We need an idea of someone who is self-sacrificing, isn't just thinking of his own or her own enlightenment, but everyone's, and therefore sacrifices himself or herself in getting across to everyone. So this is the idea of the bodhisattva. It's not so different in some ways from the teaching we have in Christianity of who Christ was, someone who sacrificed himself on behalf of others. But there it's very graphic, it's got a different sort of setting. But the bodhisattva is the idea of someone who has at least some enlightenment, who is sacrificing, instead of sitting by himself or herself, thinking, this is for me, I'm concerned with my enlightenment, let's share this. So this developed a new ideal. Now that was a good side of it, I think, but there was a downside. And that is, bit by bit, it started becoming a religious institution. And one mark of a religious institution is priests. The Buddha didn't say anything about priests. In fact, he avoided priests. He avoided the Brahmin priests. And the Theravada that were developing in Sri Lanka and Thailand and so on, they didn't have priests, just had monks. And there would be a senior monk, of course, who had more experience, but no priests. And to this day, you don't really have priests in Thailand or Sri Lanka. You'll have an abbot who's in charge of a temple, but he's not a priest. Whereas now, as it spread northward, it developed into quite a hierarchical institution with priests in China, in Tibet, in Korea, in Japan. I personally know a Zen priest. He's not a monk as such, he's a priest. So what is a priest? A priest is someone who's in charge, if you like, of the teaching and maybe has some sort of direct transmission and is in charge of all the paraphernalia and puts himself between each human being and the great insight or the great truth. Some people would argue, well, such is the sheepish nature of human beings in general that that's what you need. Don't know, that sounds a bit demeaning to me. Do we need priests anymore? Priests of any kind? I think we need facilitators. Yes, we need teachers, and we need lots of them. But I doubt whether we need priests. So the Mahayana became a hierarchical organization, an institution, with temples popping up everywhere. And not only that, the teachings of the Buddha became crystallized, solidified, and started to become like a system of beliefs. Can you sense how far we are wandering from the original issue? For you, sitting down, listening to this, your issue is what? Stress? Dissatisfaction? Puzzlement? Bewilderment? Trying to make sense of it all? Do I really need to know what is going on in Tibet? It's interesting, and I have sympathy for the people in Tibet, that they've lost their homeland, all of that kind of thing, yes, I know, but how does that relate to my meditation? Because it's an interesting thing that today many people take Tibetan Buddhism to be Buddhism. That is what it's like. If you want an example, if you want to know what Buddhism is, look at Tibetan Buddhism. Unfortunately, it's completely false. Much as I love a lot of what is in the teaching, but what I appreciate in it is what is original in it. But it was the 8th century before Tibet received teachings that we call Buddhist. Almost 1,000 years or so. For example, a character called Padmasambhava, who was Indian, took the Buddha's teachings to Tibet. Can you imagine? 1,000 years have passed and it arrives in Tibet. And what happens next? They bring with it a lot of other Indian teachings, tantric teachings, for example, or what we now call Hindu teachings, and mix it all up. Then they have their own religion, which was already there in Tibet, which is called Burn. And most of what we now associate with Buddhism is actually not Buddhist at all. It's Burn. Now, does it make any sense for us here to take on the cultures of other countries? If we can appreciate them, we can learn things from them, there's no doubt about that, and we can see the beauty in them. But we are here now. Isn't there something farcical in trying to be Tibetan, or trying to be Japanese, or trying to be Thai? We are forgetting the original problem. The original problem was my dissatisfaction and my bewilderment. That is the problem and the one and only problem. And the one and only problem that the Buddha was actually addressing. And he says so 1,000 times in his teaching. What he is saying, in effect, I'm not interested in history, psychology, biology, or physiology, or the history of religion. I'm interested only in one thing: human suffering, and getting to the bottom of this. If that is the case, why do we need to take a devious route through all the cultures of the Eastern world? We don't need to be that devious, but I'm not saying that we shouldn't learn something from them, but it's so easy to get swamped by it, over-impressed by it, get lost in it, and then what we're doing then is becoming Buddhists. The Buddha didn't ask us to become Buddhists. The Buddha was not a Buddhist. The Buddha was a guy, he was a person like us sitting around here, who was puzzled by the perennial suffering of human beings. That is what he was, and that is what he wanted to get to the bottom of. So was the Buddha a Buddhist? I don't think so. Was the Buddha teaching Buddhism? Gosh, what an ugly word. What an ugly word. Buddhism. Bud means awake. It's a root from a Sanskrit word meaning awakened. Now we take a root of a Sanskrit word and then we stick an ism on the end. A hybrid, a little monster. So we have communism, socialism, Marxism, conservatism, alcoholism, feminism, every kind of ism, and now we have a Buddhism, and they all seem to be on the same level, all contending with each other. Well, to hell with isms. That's what I say. I don't want any isms. I don't want to hear about any isms. They're all ideologies, they're all belief systems, and they don't do us any good. We attach to them, then we cling to them, then we have differences and we quarrel over them. And it's a sad thing if the Buddha's teachings become another source of quarrels. You know, I'm not going to say this every week. I just think it needs to be said. That We are here because it's a very simple matter. It's not complicated. We are dissatisfied, bewildered, and afraid. Ultimately. So, that's what we're here for. To try to address that with the teachings of a very great teacher, but not the only one. There are other great teachers that one can also learn from. But he was, I think, a particularly insightful teacher. But there were other great teachers, and many of them, that we should also, from time to time, learn from. And in fact, many of them were saying very similar things, which is not surprising, because there is only one humanity and there is only one human problem. So of course they're all saying the same thing in different ways, in different languages, in different cultures. But the Buddha had a particularly vivid and practical, determined, single-minded way of getting it across. And he did that for 45 years without ever deviating and without ever creating institutions or positions or hierarchies or anything of that kind. So we don't need to learn a lot about Buddhism. We need to actually do the practices, the actual practices. Because where is this dissatisfaction? Where is this bewilderment? Where is this fear? Where is it? Is it on the carpet somewhere? Is it hanging from the ceiling? Is it to be found in the bushes outside? Where is it? It's here. It's me. It's you. It's you. That's where it is. So that's where we address it. And that means doing something. It means looking into yourself, studying yourself, understanding what's going on, and changing it. Sometimes with difficulty, but change it you will, and whatever degree you succeed in developing self-awareness and understanding yourself, that to the same degree will you find some peace. So it'd be quite tempting to take all the Buddhist books in all the Buddhist libraries, make one big pyre of them and burn the damn lot. Because we've got the essentials. We just need to do them. I know I'm overstating things, but it's helpful sometimes to cut through a mountain of complications that develop over many centuries. It's sometimes useful to overstate things in order to get back to the point of it all, because otherwise we're in danger of just losing the point of it. The point of it is you. You are the point of it. Your happiness is the point of it. Our happiness as human beings is the point of it. It has no other point. I'm going to stop there before I blow a gasket.
New Buddha Way approaches meditation as a way of life, letting go of East and West, past and future, and starting afresh here and now. To find out more, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.